and my uncommon intelligence for a child. Remarks I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was, I would never be any service to anyone as a slave. To a mind like mine, restless, inquisitive, and observant of everything that was passing, it is easy to suppose that religion was the subject to which it would be directed. And although this subject principally occupied my thoughts, there was nothing that I saw or heard of to which my attention was not directed. The manner in which I learned to read and write not only had a great influence on my own mind, as I acquired with the most perfect ease, so much so that I have no recollection whatsoever of learning the alphabet.
To the astonishment of the family, one day, when a book was shown to him to keep him from crying, he began spelling the names of different objects. This was a source of wonder to all in the neighborhood, particularly the blacks, and this learning was constantly improved on at all opportunities.
When I got large enough to go to work while employed, I was reflecting on many things that would present themselves to my imagination. And whenever an opportunity occurred of looking at a book when the school children were getting their lessons, I would find many things that the fatality of my own imagination had depicted to me before. All my time, not devoted to my master's service, was spent either in prayer or in making experiments and casting different things in molds made of earth, in attempting to make paper, gunpowder, and many other experiments that, although I could not perfect, yet convinced me of its practicability if I had the means.
He was not addicted to sealing in his youth, nor had he ever been, yet such was the confidence of the Negroes in the neighborhood, even at this early period in his life, in his superior judgment, that they would often carry him with them when they were going on any roguery, and to plan for them. Growing up amongst them, with this confidence in his superior judgment, and when this, in their opinion, was perfected by divine inspiration, from the circumstances already alluded to in his infancy, and which belief was ever afterwards zealously inculcated by the austerity of his life and manners, which became the subject of remark by white and black.
Having soon discovered to be great, I must appear so, and therefore studiously avoided mixing in society, and wrapped myself in mystery, devoting my time to fasting and prayer.
By this time, having arrived to man's estate, and hearing the scriptures commented on at meetings, he was struck with that particular passage which says,
"Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you." I reflected much on this passage and prayed daily for light on this subject. As I was praying one day at my plow, the Spirit spoke to me, saying, "Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you."
What do you mean by the Spirit?
The Spirit that spoke to the prophets in former days. And I was greatly astonished, and for 2 years prayed continuously, whenever my duty would permit. And then again, I had the same revelations, which fully confirmed me in the impression that I was ordained for some great purpose in the hands of the Almighty. Several years rolled around, in which many events occurred to strengthen me in this my belief. At this time, I reverted in my mind to remarks made of me in my childhood, and the things that had been shown me. And as it had been said of me in my childhood by those by whom I've been taught to pray, both white and black, and in whom I had the greatest confidence, that I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was, I would never be of any use to anyone as a slave. Now, finding I have arrived to man's estate, and I was a slave, and these revelations being made known to me, I began to direct my attention to this great object to fulfill the purpose for which, by this time, I felt assured I was intended. knowing the influence I had obtained over the minds of fellow servants, not by the means of conjuring and such like tricks. For them, I've always spoke of such things with contempt. But by the communion of the Spirit, whose revelations I often communicated to them, and they believed and said my wisdom came from God. I now began to prepare them for my purpose by telling them something was about to happen that would terminate in fulfilling the great promise that had been made to me.
About this time, Nat was placed under an overseer from whom he ran away. And after remaining in the woods for 30 days, he returned to the astonishment of the Negroes on the plantation, who thought he had made his escape to some other part of the country as his father had done before.
But the reason for my return was that the Spirit appeared to me and said, I had my wishes directed to the things of this world and not to the kingdom of heaven, and that I should return to the service of my earthly master. For he who knoweth his master's will and doubteth not shall be beaten with many stripes. And thus I have chastened you. And the Negroes found fault and murmured against me, saying that if they had my sense, they would not serve any master in the world. And about this time I had a vision, and I saw white spirits and black spirits engaged in battle. And the sun was dark, the thunder rolled in the heavens, and blood flowed in the streams. And I heard a voice saying,
Such is your luck, such you are called to see, and let it come rough or smooth, you must surely bear it.
I now withdrew myself as much as my situation would permit from the intercourse of my fellow servants, for the avowed purpose of serving the spirits more fully. And it appeared to me and reminded me of the things it had already shown me, and that it would then reveal to me the knowledge of elements, the revolution of the planets, the operation of tides, and the changing of the seasons.
After this revelation in the year 1825, and the knowledge of the elements being made known to him, he sought more than ever to obtain true holiness before the great day of judgment should appear.
And then I begun to receive the true knowledge of faith. And from the first steps of righteousness until the last, I was made perfect, and the Holy Ghost was with me, and said,
Behold me as I stand in the heavens.
And I looked, and saw the forms of men in different altitudes. And there were lights in the sky to which the children of darkness gave other names than which they really were. For they were the light of the Savior's hand, stretched forth from east to west, even as they were extended on the cross of Calvary for the redemption of sinners. And I wondered greatly at these miracles, and prayed to be informed of the certainty of the meaning thereof. And shortly afterwards, while laboring in the fear, I discovered drops of blood on the coin as though it was dew from the heaven. And I communicated it to men, both white and black, in the neighborhood. And then I found on the leaves in the woods hieroglyphic characters and numbers with the forms of men in different attitudes, portrayed in blood, and representing the figures I had seen before in the heavens. And now the Holy Ghost had revealed itself to me and made plain the miracles it had shown me. For as the blood of Christ had been shed on this earth and had ascended to heaven for the salvation of sinners, and was now returning to earth again to form in the form of dew. And as the leaves on the trees bore the impression of the figures I had seen in the heavens, it was plain to me that the Savior was about to lay down the yoke he had borne of the sin of man, and the great day of judgment was at hand. About this time, I told these things to a white man,
Ethelbridge T. Bradley.
On whom it had a wonderful effect. And he ceased from his wickedness and was attacked immediately with a continuous eruption. And blood oozed from his pores of his skin. And after praying and fasting 9 days, he was healed. And the Spirit appealed to me again and said, as the Savior had been baptized, so should we be also. And when the white people would not let us be baptized by the church, we went down into the water together in the sight of many who reviled us and were baptized by the Spirit. After this, I rejoiced greatly and gave thanks to God. And on the 12th of May, 1828, I heard a loud noise in the heavens. The Spirit instantly appeared to me and said the serpent was loosed, and Christ had laid down the yoke he had borne from the sins of men. And I thought I should take it on and fight against the serpent, for the time was fast approaching, when the first shall be last, and the last shall be first.
Do you not find yourself mistaken now?
Was not Christ crucified? And by the signs in heaven, that it would make known to me, I should commence the great work, and until the first sign appeared, I should conceal it from the knowledge of men. And on the appearance of the signs,
The eclipse of the sun, last February,
I should arise and prepare myself, and slay my enemies with their own weapons. And immediately on the sign appearing in the heavens, the seal was removed from my lips, and I communicated the great work laid out for me to do, to four in whom I had the greatest confidence: Henry, Hart, Nelson, and Sam. It was intended by us to have begun the work of death on the 4th of July last. Many were the plans formed and rejected by us, and it affected my mind to such a degree that I felt sick. And the time passed without our coming to any determination how to commence. Still forming new schemes and rejecting them when the signs appeared again, which determined me not to wait longer. Since the commencement of 1830, I had been living with Mr. Joseph Travis, who was to me a kind master and placed the greatest confidence in me. In fact, I had no cause to complain of his treatment to me.
on Saturday evening, the 20th of August, it was agreed on between Henry, Hart, and Nat to prepare a dinner the next day for the men they expected, and then to consider a plan, as they had not yet determined on any. Hart, on the following morning, brought a pig, and Henry brandy, and being joined by Sam, Nelson, Will, and Jack, they prepared in the woods a dinner.
Where about 3 o'clock I joined them.
Why were you so backward in joining them?
The same reason that had caused me not to mix with them for years before. I saluted them on coming up and asked Will, how come he there? He answered, his life was worth no more than others, and his liberty as dear to him. I asked him if he thought to attain it. He said he would, or lose his life. This was enough to put him in full confidence. Jack, I knew, was only a tool in the hands of Hart. It was quickly agreed we shall commence at home
Mr. Joseph Travis's.
on that night until we have arrived and equipped ourselves and gathered sufficient force. Neither age nor sex was to be spared.
Which was invariably adhered to.
We remained at the feast until about 2 hours in the night, when we went to the house and found Austin. They all went to the cider press and drank, except myself. On returning to the house, Hart went to the door with an axe for the purpose of breaking it open, as we knew we were strong enough to murder the family if they were awakened by the noise. But reflecting that it might create an alarm in the neighborhood, we determined to enter the house secretly and murder them while sleeping. Hart got a ladder and set it against the chimney, on which I ascended, and hoisting a window, entered and came downstairs, unbarred the door, and removed the guns from their place. It was then observed that I must spill the first blood, on which Shalom with a hatchet, and accompanied by Will, I entered my master's chambers. It being dark, I could not give a death blow. The hatchet glanced from his head. He sprung from the bed and called for his wife,
whose name remains unrecorded by history.
It was his last word. Will laid him dead with a blow of his axe, and Mrs. Travis shared the same fate as she lay in bed.
The murder of this family, 5 in number, was the work of a moment. Not one of them awoke.
There was a little infant sleeping in the cradle that was forgotten until he had left the house and gone some distance. When Harry and Will returned and killed, we got here 4 guns that were shooting and had several old muskets with a pound or 2 of powder. We remained some time at the barn where we paraded. I formed them in a line as soldiers, and after carrying them through all the maneuvers I was master of, marched them off to Mr. Francis, about 600-yard distance.
Sam and Will went to the door and knocked. Mr. Francis asked who was there. Sam replied it was him, and he had a letter for him, on which he got up and came to the door. They immediately seized him, and dragging him out of a little from the door, he was dispatched by repeated blows on the head. There was no other white person in the family. They started from there for Mr. Reese's, maintaining the most perfect silence on their march, where, finding the door unlocked, they entered and murdered Mrs. Reese in her bed while sleeping. Her son awoke, but it was only to sleep the sleep of death. He had only time to say, "Who is that?" and he was no more.
For Mrs. Reese's, we went to Mrs. Turner, a mile distance, which we reached about sunrise on Monday morning. Here Austin and Sam went to the still. We're finding Mr. Peoples. Austin shot him, and the rest of us went to the house. As we approached, the family discovered us and shut the door. They hope! Will, with one stroke of his axe, opened, and we entered and found Mrs. Turner and Mrs. Newsom in the middle of the room, almost frightened to death. Will immediately killed Mrs. Turner with one blow of his axe. I took Mrs. Newsom by the hand, and with the sword I had when I was apprehended, I struck her several blows over the head. But not being able to kill her, as the sword was dull, Will, turning around and discovering it, dispatched her as also.
A general destruction of property and a search for money and ammunition always succeeded the murders. By this time, Turner's company amounted to 15, and 9 men mounted, who started for Mrs. Whitehead's. The other 6 were to go through by way of Mr. Bryant's and rejoin the main party at Mrs. Whitehead's.
As we approached the house, we discovered Mr. Richard Whitehead standing in the cotton patch near the fence. We called over to him, "Mr. Whitehead!" And Will, the executioner, was near at him, with his fatal axe to send him to an untimely grave. As we pushed on through the house, I discovered someone run around the garden, and thinking it was some of the White family, I pursued them, but finding it was a servant girl belonging to the house. I returned to commence the work of death, but that whom I left had not been idle. All the family were already murdered, but Mrs. Whitehead and her daughter Margaret. As I came round to the door, I saw Will pulling Mrs. Whitehead out of the house, and at the step he nearly severed her head from her body. with his broad axe. Mrs. Martin, when I discovered her, had concealed herself in the corner, formed by the rejection of the cellar cat from the house. On my approach, she fled, but was soon overtaken. And after repeated blows with the sword, I killed her by the blow on the head with a fence rail.
By this time, the six who had gone by Mr. Bryant's rejoined them and informed Nat that they had done the work of death assigned to them. They again divided, part going to Mr. Richard Porter's, and from thence to Nathaniel Francis's, the others to Mr. Howell Harris's and Mr. T. Doyle's.
On my reaching Mr. Porter's, he had escaped with his family. I understood there that the alarm had already spread, and I immediately returned to bring up those sent to Mr. Doyle and Mr. Howard Harris. The party left going on to Mr. Francis, having told them I would join them in the neighborhood. I met these sent to Mr. Doyle and Mr. Harris, returned, having met Mr. Doyle on the road and killed him, and learning from whom I joined them that Mr. Harris was from home. I immediately pursued the course taken by the party going on before. But knowing they would complete the work of death and pillage at Mr. Francis before I could get there, I went to Mr. Peter Everett, expecting to find him there. But they had already been here also. I then went to Mr. John T. Barrows. They had been here and murdered him. I pursued on their tracks to Captain DeWitt Harris, where I found the greater part mounted and ready to start. The man, now amounting to about 40, shouted and hurrahed as I rode up. Somewhere in the yard, loading their guns, others drinking.
Captain Harris and his family had escaped. The property of the house they destroyed, robbing him of money and other valuables.
I ordered them to mount up. Mount up! Let's go! And march instantly. This was about 9 or 10 o'clock, Monday morning. I proceeded to Mr. Levi Walls, 2 or 3 mile distance. I took my station in the rear, and as it was my object to carry the terror of devastation wherever we went, I placed 15 or 20 of the best armed and most to be relied on in front, who generously approached the houses as fast as their horses could run. This was for two purposes: to prevent their escape and to strike terror in the inhabitants.
On this account, Nat never got to the houses after leaving Mrs. Whitehead's until the murders were committed, except in one case.
I sometimes got in sight in time to see the work of death completed, viewed the mangled bodies as they lay in silent satisfaction, and immediately started in quest of other victims.
Having murdered Mrs. Waller and 10 children, they started for Mr. William Williams. Having killed him and 2 little boys that were there, while engaged in this, Mrs. Williams fled and got some distance from the house, but she was pursued, overtaken, and compelled to get up behind one of the company, who brought her back, and, after showing her the mangled body of her lifeless husband, she was told to get down and lay by his side, where she was shot dead.
I then started for Mr. Jacob Williams, where the family were murdered. Here we found a young man named Dewey, who had come on business with Mr. Williams. He was pursued, overtaken, and shot. Mrs. Vaughn was the next place we visited, and after murdering the family here, I determined on starting for Jerusalem. Our numbers amounted now to 50 or 60, all mounted and armed with guns, axes, swords, and clubs. On reaching Mr. James W. Parker's gate, immediately on the road leading to Jerusalem, and about 3 miles distant, it was proposed to me to call there, but I objected, as I knew he was gone to Jerusalem, and my object was to reach there as soon as possible. But some of the men having relations at Mr. Parker's, it was agreed that they might call and get his people. I remained at the gate on the road with 7 or 8, the others going across the field to the house. After half a mile off, after waiting some time for them, I became impatient and started to the house.
On their return, they were met by a party of white men who had pursued their blood-stained track and who had fired on those at the gate and dispersed them, which Nat knew nothing of, not having been at that time rejoined by any of them.
Immediately on discovering the whites, I ordered my men to halt, and form, as they appeared to be alarmed. The white men, 18 in number, approached us in about 100 yards when one of them fired.
This was against the positive orders of Captain Alexander P. Pete, who commanded and who had directed the men to reserve their fire until within 30 paces.
And I discovered about half of them retreated. I then ordered my men to fire and rush on them. The few remaining stood their ground until we approached within 50 yards. When they fired and retreated, we pursued and overtook some of them, who we thought we left dead.
They were not killed.
After pursuing them about 200 yards and raising a little hill, I discovered they were met by another party and had halted and were reloading their guns.
This was a small party from Jerusalem who knew the Negroes were in the field and had just tied their horses to await their return to the road, knowing that Mr. Parker and family were in Jerusalem, but knew nothing of the party that had gone in with Captain Pete. On hearing the firing, they immediately rushed to the spot and arrived just in time to arrest the progress of these barbarous villains and save the lives of their friends and fellow citizens.
Thinking that those who returned first and the party who fired on us at 50 or 60 yards distant had all only fallen back to meet others with ammunition, as I saw them reloading their guns, and more coming up then I saw at first, and several of my bravest men being wounded, the others became panic-struck and squandered over the field. The white man pursued and fired on us several times. Hart had his horse shot under him, and I caught another from him as it was running by me. 5 or 6 men were wounded, but none left on the field. Finding myself defeated here, I instantly determined to go through the private way and cross the Nottingway River at Cypress Bridge, 3 miles below Jerusalem, and attack that place in the rear. As I expected, they would look for me on the other road, and I had a great desire to get there to procure arms and ammunition. After going a short distance in this private way, accompanied by 20 men, I overtook 2 or 3 who told me the others were despised, and in every direction. After trying in vain to collect a sufficient force to proceed to Jerusalem, I determined to return, as I sure they would make back to their old neighborhood, where they would rejoin me, make new recruits, and come down again. On my way back, I called at Mrs. Thomas, Mrs. Spencer, and several other places. The white families having fled, we found no more victims to gratify our thirst for blood. We stopped at Major Wrigley's quarters for the night, and being joined by 4 of his men, with the recruits made since my defeat, we mustered, now about 40 strong. After placing out guards, I laid down to sleep, but was quickly roused by a great racket starting up. I found some mounted and others in great confusion. One of the guards, having given the alarm that we were about to be attacked, I ordered some to ride round and scout, and on their return, the others being more alarmed, not knowing who they were, fled in different ways, so that I was reduced to about 20 again. Was this I determined to attempt to recruit and proceed on to rally in the neighborhood. I had left Dr. Blunt's, was the nearest house, which we reached just before day. On riding up the yard, Hart fired a gun. We expected Dr. Blunt and his family was at Major Wrigley. As I knew there was a company of men there, the gun was fired to ascertain if any of the family were at home. We were immediately fired upon and retreated, leaving several of my men. I do not know what became of them, as I never saw them after. Pursuing our course back and coming in sight of Captain Harris, where we had been the day before, we discovered a party of white men at the house, on which all deserted me but two, Jacob and Nat. We concealed ourselves in the woods until night, when I sent them in search of Henry, Sam, and Nelson, and Hart, and directed them to rally all they could at the place we had our dinner the Sunday before, where they would find me. And I accordingly returned there as soon as it was dark, and remained until Wednesday evening. When discovering white men riding around the place as though they were looking for someone, and none of my men joining me, I concluded that Jake and Nat had been taken and compelled to betray me. On this, I gave up all hope for the present, and on Thursday night, after having supplied myself with provisions from Mr. Travis, I scratched a hole under a tiled fence rail in a field, where I concealed myself for 6 weeks, never leaving my hiding place, but for a few minutes in the dead of night to get water, which was very near. Thinking by this time I could venture out, I began to go out and about in the night, eavesdrop the houses in the neighborhood. Pursuing this course for about a fortnight and gathering little or no intelligence, afraid of speaking to any human being, and returning every morning in my cave before the dawn of day. I know not how long I might have led this life if accidents had not betrayed me. A dog in the neighborhood, passing by my hiding place one night while I was out, was attracted by some meat I had in my cave, and crawled in and stole it, and was coming out just as I returned. A few nights later, two Negroes, having started to go hunting with the same dog, and passed that way, the dog came again to the place, and having just gone out to walk about, discovered me and barked. On which, thinking myself discovered, I spoke to them to beg my concealment. On making myself known, they fled from me. Knowing then they would betray me, I immediately left my hiding place and was pursued almost instantaneously, until I'd taken a fortnight afterwards by Mr. Benjamin Phipps in a little hole I had dug out with my sword for the purpose of concealment under the top of a fallen tree.
On Mr. Phipps discovering his place of concealment, he cocked his gun and aimed at Nat.
Don't shoot.
Your sword, boy.
I delivered it to him, and he brought me to prison. During the time I was pursued, I had many hair-breadth escapes, which your time would not permit you to relate. I am here loaded with chains and ready to suffer the fate that awaits.
A list of persons murdered in the insurrection on the 21st and 22nd of August, 1831. Joseph Travers and wife and 3 children. Mrs. Elizabeth Turner, Hartwell Peppers, Sarah Newsom, Mrs. P. Reese and son William, Trajan Doyle, Henry Bryant and wife and child, and wife's mother, Mrs. Catherine Whitehead, son Richard and 4 daughters and grandchild. Flavia Francis, Nathaniel Francis, overseer, and 2 children. John C. Barrow, George Vaughn, Mrs. Levi Waller, and 10 children. William Williams, wife and 2 boys. Mrs. Coswell Worrell and a child, Mrs. Rebecca Vaughn, and Eliza Vaughn, and son Arthur. Mrs. John K. Williams and child, Mrs. Jacob Williams and 3 children, and Edward Drury, amounting to 55. A list of Negroes brought before the Court of Southampton with their owners' names and sentences. Daniel, owned by Richard Porter, convicted. Moses, owned by J.T. Barrow, convicted. Tom, owned by Kathy Whitehead, discharged. Jacket Andrew, owned by Kathy Whitehead, convicted and transported. Jacob, owned by George H. Charlton, discharged without trial. Isaac, owned by George H. Charlton, convicted and transported. Jack, owned by Everett Bryant, discharged. Nathan, owned by Benjamin Blunt's estate, convicted. Nathan, Tom, and Davy, boys, owned by Nathaniel Francis, convicted and transported. Davy, owned by Elizabeth Turner, convicted. Curtis, owned by Thomas Ridley, convicted. Stephen, owned by Thomas Ridley, convicted. Harding and Isham, owned by Benjamin Edwards, convicted and transported. Sam, owned by Nathaniel Francis, convicted. Hart, owned by Joseph Chavez estate, convicted. Moses, a boy, owned by Joseph Travis estate, convicted and transported. Davy, owned by Levi Waller, convicted. Nelson, owned by Jacob Williams, convicted. Nat, owned by Edmund Turner's estate, convicted. Jack, owned by William Reese's estate, convicted. Dred, owned by Nathaniel Francis, convicted. Arnold, a free man, discharged. Sam, owned by J.W. Parker, acquitted. Ferry and Archer, owned by J.W. Parker, discharged without trial. Jim, owned by William Vaughn, acquitted. Bob, owned by Temperance Parker, acquitted. Davy, owned by Joseph Parker, discharged without trial. Daniel, owned by Solomon D. Parker, discharged without trial. Thomas Heathcock, free, sent on for further trial. Joe, owned by John C. Turner, convicted. Lucy, owned by John T. Barrow, convicted. Matt, owned by Thomas Ridley, acquitted. Jim, owned by Richard Porter, acquitted. Exhumed artist, a free person, sent on for further trial. Joe, owned by Richard B. Briggs, discharged without trial. Barry Newsom, a free person, sent on for further trial. Stephen, owned by James Bell, acquitted. Jim and Isaac, owned by Samuel Champion, convicted and transported. Preston, owned by Hannah Williamson, acquitted. Frank, owned by Solomon D. Parker, convicted and transported. Jack and Shadrach, owned by Nathaniel Simmons, acquitted. Nelson, owned by Benjamin Blunt's estate, acquitted. Sam, owned by Peter Edwards, convicted. Archer, owned by Arthur G. Reese, acquitted. Isham Turner, a free person, sent on for further trial. And finally, Nat Turner, owned by Putnam Moore, convicted. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the conclusion of the Confessions of Nat Turner, and we thank you for your presence. I'd like to now ask you to engage in a post-show conversation about what you've just seen. Greg and Jamel. So it's difficult work here. We have Nat Turner, who, in the beginning of this confession, we talk about him being a prophet, a bearer of truth and purpose. And then we are listening to the details of the insurrection, and it's horrible. It's brutal. And the question that has been raging for the last 189 years is, was this man a madman, or was he a hero doing the work of God? Yes.
It's like he was moved by his voice, his spirit, which people have done, and sometimes misunderstanding what that meant to do, but it's a strong force driving him on.
Behind you, so
Oh, when you say discharge, what does that mean?
that they were not convicted.
Okay, so that means they left, they could go their own way.
There was, in terms of the particular trial, they were not held, they were not put in jail.
They were not held responsible, so they could leave.
Right. They were still enslaved.
Okay, okay. Okay, so they were still slaves, so.
Right.
Okay, they didn't get convicted, so that means they didn't die. So they still was continue to be slaves.
Exactly.
Okay. All of them?
No, as I read, that some were acquitted, but many were
Discharge.
convicted.
No, I'm talking about the discharge.
Discharged, yes.
Okay, okay.
Robert, I hear, what did transport,
Sent out of the state,
like sold away?
yes. Yes.
Conditions in cotton plantations were harsher than conditions in tobacco plantations, at Virginia, and conditions in sugar plantations were worse still. Those were halfway to death camps. It was a combination of the industrial hell of factory sweatshops and the agricultural hell of plantations. So being sent from the physically less demanding environment of an upper South tobacco or hemp plantation to a cotton plantation or sugar plantation was an extremely harsh punishment. Like not as harsh as death of dismemberment, but
But still a slow death sentence.
for the sugar plantations, yes. For the cotton plantations, not a death sentence so much as a lifetime of much harder labor.
I can tell for myself that when I first got here and I read and heard about Nat Turner, I thought like most people did. He was just a crack crop with the ground kill. I don't care whether it was white people, black people, orange people, purple people. If you murder someone, you're a monster. That was my first thought of it. And I really didn't, to be honest, I really didn't think much of it other than that. If you kill someone, you kill someone. That's pretty much where I was. And, eye for an eye. That's pretty much how I was. So when I first got here, and that was pretty much my opinion, if you saw the clip before we even started doing this, I even said, why was he a prophet? Why call him a prophet? Just because other people thought so? Or just because, other people thought he was this grand jury? Or just because he thought he called himself one because he saw these revelations? And that's pretty much how I thought about it. But then getting into it more and reading it, my opinion changed. And the reason that it changed is because of, if you caught it, there were a lot of times in the script where Turner himself showed humanity, which means that, he wasn't this, driving monster that just going around just attacking people. He actually did have feelings. And it actually did show me that, you know what? Maybe he really did thought this was a purpose or a calling of something that he had to do. And it surprised me that I actually had a mind change, because as I said before, I came into this thinking he was just some monster with a axe grind. That's pretty much what it is. So in reading this, as I said, you catch some of the times in his humanity, like when he said that he felt sick, even about coordinating plans like this, but he went on with it anyway. So, he thought this was something he had to do. Even when he was talking about his master and he said he was kind and he didn't have any contempt for him, but yet you murdered him. So it was something that you felt like you had to do. So I think in those statements, it really shows that this was something he felt he had to do because even though it made you sick to your stomach, and even though you was murdering someone that you said treated you kindly, you still did it. So that's why I came to the conclusion that he really did feel like this was something he had to do, like this was his purpose that he had to fulfill.
And he was a prophet in your
Right.
Well, the passage about him feeling sick is ambiguous because he doesn't say what it was that made him feel sick.
Actually, he kind of does. He said while he was forming the plans, he felt sick.
Yes, while he was forming the plans, but that doesn't say whether he felt sick with compassion for these people that he was compelled to kill, or sick with worry about the responsibility of leading the rebellion, but not having any concern about the lives he plans to take. We don't know from the passage which of those it was, or if it was for another reason. If maybe he felt sick with worry that he would let God down and not kill enough people. There's not enough information there to say why he felt sick, and we're filling in blanks.
Well, that's very true. I think it's because of the reason I came to this conclusion was because of, like I said, even though he had a kind master, he killed him. So it should tell you right there that, maybe this is not something I want to do because this man was kind to me, but it's something that I felt like I had to do.
Well, Jamel actually gives a great example of what we're hoping to do with this, examination of Nat Turner, is that we have preconceived notions about him, and as shown in the clip when we have the lady who interrupts the show with saying Nat Turner killed my family, we know that we have a lot of people who need to process and look at this information, look at this situation.
Miss Rose Nichols.
Yes.
Nat Turner killed my family in South End.
Which family was that?
You know what? I don't know, and that's a great question. That was in 2009, so it's been over 10 years ago that it actually happened, and but I never did find that out. What did happen at that performance, though, is that the woman who played Harriet Tubman said the same thing that Jamel has just said, is that initially the play features 8 historical figures who are wax figures in the museum. The museum curator breaks the Confederate flag, and they have to debate whether or not to burn the flag. And the woman who played Harriet Tubman, going into the whole project, she was for burning the flag. And then after this conversation in Suffolk, she says in this clip, "I've changed my mind about burning the flag." And that is the conversation that we want to encourage, because that's the goal, is to put this difficult history out here, as opposed to sitting on it and not talking about it and dealing with it. Let's look at it and see how we move beyond it. And that is our goal with the Portsmouth Theater Academy. We are looking to train people to be reenactors of historical figures, but also actors on the Broadway stage, because this is, these are two skill sets that are very similar, but have, different rules in terms of how you use them. And it's important to do this history here, particularly in Tidewater, Hampton Roads, because this is where it happened. This is our local history that if we can kind of figure out, again, how to deal with the legacy of slavery here in this region, then we become a role model for the rest of the nation in terms of how to deal with difficult history, because we got difficult history from coast to coast everywhere, and we have to find ways to be able to access that history, talk about it, and move beyond that history. So I would like to get any more questions or comments from the audience there.
I knew very little, not being from here originally, knew very little of the story, but always assumed this was an enslaved person that got fed up. And had I been in the same situation, I would have killed everybody I could have. You know,
Really?
try to get out. Yeah. I mean, if somebody's enslaved you and taken away your freedom, and God only knows what kind of horrible things you've seen happen to other people, maybe your family, or even to yourself. I mean, I can imagine a rage burning in me to either give up or to be so mad I just.
And then, let me ask you a question. As a man of God yourself, do you feel like that rage would be a personal vendetta, or would you feel like that rage would have been a calling from God?
I was thinking, and so that's where I was going with what I was saying is, in just looking at it before, it's a fed up guy. He's going to do what he can. And having this question presented, is this a prophet? Well, why couldn't it be? Moses had killed 2 Egyptians when he was called to go back. David killed Uriah. I mean, and that wasn't even about power. He just wanted his wife, right? And we still look at David as a wonderful king, if not a prophet. He wrote many of the Psalms. So why couldn't, now, I don't know that God calls you to murder, but maybe that's my own moralist, the way I was raised.
Right.
But why does one, so let's say he stepped out of God's will to commit the murder. Well, why does that erase any of the rest of it? Or why does that say, or does that negate God speaking through his life before? I don't think so.
Well, the only issue, like I said, when I first came here, the only issue is that I kind of thought of it as you did. That, you know, I don't think God will convince anyone to kill. You know, matter of fact, it's one of the commandments that I should not kill. So I kind of felt like you did. I don't feel like that he would try to convince anyone to kill anyone. That's why I thought when I first got here, it was more for personal gain than it was of him being a prophet. But then, as I said, as I read more into it, and the part that really got to me was that, you know, you killed someone that you found treated you kind, and that you didn't have any contempt for, but yet you still dispersed of them.
But I would see that as, in that situation, it's a system you're trying to overthrow. It's not individuals you're trying to get back at.
Right.
Yeah.
It's if I don't do this, so if I don't kill everybody in power in this county, I'm gonna get hung.
I would still be.
And that's what, and I'll still be a slave, and that's what happened.
Right.
Right.
I want to, when you brought in religion, I want to say this, that when you bring religion in a concept, and you have to think from the beginning of religion, from the beginning of the Bible, and all through the Bible, there is killing. And all through the Bible, God has said, okay, when he took the Israelites out, he went those people, they had to kill those people. When they took over their land, the land of honey, milk and honey, they were already there first. So do you think they went over there in the land of milk and honey and those people there was no battle? It couldn't have been. It couldn't have been. The Israelites took over this land, so they had to be a war, a killing.
I never, besides the fact that there wasn't wars, or that killing didn't have to occur in order to get what some people wanted.
Right.
What I'm saying is, the fact is, are they doing it more for personal gain, or are they doing it because they feel like they are here to fulfill some kind of divine purpose? Because to me, it's a big difference. You know, personal gain is just that, personal gain. You know, you're doing it because you want to kill somebody, just because you want to be in charge, you want to be the leader, or you want to overthrow something. But divine purpose is completely different. You feel like you're doing it because God told you to, or because you think that this is the path that He wanted you to take.
But what is divine purpose?
Well, to be honest with you, divine purpose is just that.
Your mind thinking, who told you it was divine purpose?
Well, for him, he said God told him.
Okay, well, how do you know it was God that told him that? It could have been Satan.
You're right. But see, that's the whole
Or it could have
purpose.
been the after effects of a stroke.
But see, that was the point that I was trying to make all along when I first got here. That, how do you know that he was called to do this purpose? But then, like I said, when I read it, the passage that stuck out to me the most, that made me change my mind, was because of the whole him killing his master who was kind to him. That's when I had to rethink my thoughts and be like, wait a minute, maybe, he
was kind, his master was kind to him,
right,
but he also enslaved him.
Right.
right.
Okay, so that, and in order to be free, he had to commit a sin, and he had to kill him. Because even if he didn't kill him, or he would have still been enslaved.
I have an issue with that, and the only issue I'm having with that is that there have been many people that have freed themselves without killing. So-
Here, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes.
As we look at it today, and none of us could agree with murder, taking someone's life,
Right.
but God uses us. God used Moses, David, and uses us today to turn systems upside down.
No,
But do you think he uses us to go against his word?
What'd you say?
Do you think that he uses us to go against his own words?
I'm not real clear about that, but I think, and I don't know what Nat Turner was thinking, if he felt the Spirit was speaking to him, if he was doing the work of God. I'm prone to think that he did it as an individual, that he was driven, that it was a personal.
And I'm sorry, Rick, keep cutting you off. I'm sorry, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
one thing that struck me in the narrative is that when Turner encountered people we consider non-combatants, it was a Quentin Tarantino story. And when he encountered armed resistance, it was Gilbert and Sullivan.
Okay.
It was, he went from Kill Bill to the joke officer in Modern Major General. Not even being unable to kill the white militia unit that assembled against them because they forgot to reload their guns and fired blanks. And the rebellion failed. They didn't capture a single county. There was a massive crackdown. The laws controlling the black population of Virginia actually got much harsher. So if Nat Turner was carrying out God's plan, God has a really warped sense of humor, because everything that happened was the exact opposite of what Turner said he was after in the uprising.
Sherry, I just thought about something, and it's something that you said to me on the phone yesterday that I didn't even realize until now.
What is that?
You remember when you said that he only committed one murder?
Yes.
So let me ask you guys, since he only committed one murder, but this was his plan that he came up with, do y'all think that right there that was sort of redemption for him?
No.
Like he felt sorry, like he couldn't do it. Like, I don't know, it was weird that this was his plan, but he only committed one murder.
Well, I think
But it wasn't for lack of trying. We get back to that Gilbert and Sullivan thing. He forgot to sharpen the sword.
Well, that's true.
But-
Well, that's true. But he could have dispatched many others along the way, Greg. But he didn't. He still let his man do all the work. So why only that one murder?
He's just as responsible for killings that he ordered his men to carry out as he is for killings that he committed with his own hand. A general is responsible for the actions of his
That's
troops.
general. He sits in
And in
it.
fact, we look at Nat Turner's insurrection as the first battle of the Civil War in 1831. That was the first battle of the Civil War, which we renamed the War Against Slavery, WAS, War Against Slavery. The second battle was the 1857 United States Supreme Court Dred Scott decision, which said that basically black folks were, is that a fire alarm or something? Smoke detector? Oh. Oh, that's you?
I don't know. I'm not.
The 1857 Dred Scott decision, which the U.S. Supreme Court said that black folks were enslaved from birth through death, that they could not be free.
That's not what the Dred Scott decision said.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
What
It
did
said the
say?
federal government could not intervene to free slaves, but it didn't say that individual masters couldn't, and it didn't say the states could
It
abolish
said
slavery.
the federal government, you're right, it was the federal government was saying that basically you were enslaved, you could not be free, you could not go to free territory and gain freedom. You were enslaved, if you were born enslaved, you would die enslaved. That's basically what it said.
No, it didn't.
Then what did it say,
Why we have
Mr.
these
Grant?
conversations?
Mr. History Master.
It said that the federal government could not intervene to free slaves. It didn't say that state governments could not intervene to free slaves. It didn't say individual masters
So in
could not
de
enslave
facto,
slaves.
But what you say is, if the federal, most of the time, if the federal government states something, the states go along with the federal government.
Or some do not, some
Okay.
do, some don't.
Yeah, but most of them go along with the federal government.
I agree with that.
But
Most-
when the
yeah,
Dred
most
Scott
states go
decision
along.
was issued, more than half the states had already outlawed slavery.
Okay.
But it was
18 had,
tenuous.
15 had
It was
not.
tenuous in terms of that. I mean,
Right.
it could go either way, many of them. So, but this proves again, okay, also the fact that why the United States Supreme Court is so important and why, right now, how, this is what we want to do with this history. We want to understand how it connects the past to the present,
Yes.
very much, right?
Yes.
And just for the record, I do think that the Dred Scott decision was monstrous and wrong for a host of other reasons, but not for that specific one.
Okay.
It's denied that free blacks could be citizens. It stripped people who enjoyed rights for generations of the rights of citizenship and said, even if you're not a slave, you're still not going to be treated as a human being with human rights in the eyes of federal law.
Right.
And that's something that deserves massive condemnation.
So the Dred Scott decision would be the second battle, and then the third battle will be the 1859 John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, at which point that sparked the Civil War from 1861 to 1865, with the war against slavery going through 1877, which was the end of Reconstruction, at which point federal troops were pulled back from all the southern camps, which allowed the rise of Jim Crow, and we get into the 19th century, in terms of all the 20th century in terms of all of this. And so that would be the war against slavery. So what we're looking to do with Juneteenth, Virginia, is to reframe history. We're not changing anything, and we're not, we're reframing it, and we're having conversations about what each step, which each point means, as opposed to what we've been doing is basically suppressing it, not talking about it, not having these type of conversations. And this is what we have to have in terms of being able to get through it. And we have to be able to disagree, with civility, and allow, people coming from radically different perspectives to be able to speak freely and to listen hopefully closely. And that's why the Nat Turner Kill My Family is such a valuable tool for Juneteenth, because it was organic in terms of, I always laugh when I can see it, because you can see the caught in the headlights, the deer caught in the headlights, look like it's on our face, because we're just like, who said that? And why does it sound like it happened last week,
Because things that happened in the past do affect
We got that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
The dead past is the living present.
One, when you read about the court documents, you said Nat Turner. They called him Nat, but they said Turner was an alias. Where did Turner come from?
He had previously belonged to the Turner family.
And that same name went with it. Okay.
Slaves did not legally have last names. They often used de facto, but the law said that they didn't. Free blacks legally had last names, but it was another way to dehumanize slaves.
The second question is, does Nat ever say where he wants us to go? Like, he knows what the plan is for Southampton County.
Mhm.
Where does he hope this will end up?
He basically, his goal seems to be to get to Jerusalem, which is modern day Franklin. Cortland, I'm sorry, yeah. And but that seemed to be his primary goal, was to get to Jerusalem. And and that never
And
happened.
that was Portland, Virginia.
Because of the religious, or that was the county seat?
That was
Both.
the county seat. Yeah, and
Both.
they're both, yes. Again, one of the signs that he interpreted as being God talking to him. Here, the county seat is Jerusalem, you know. And in terms of the question, was he a prophet? He certainly thought he was. And he received a number of signs that, you know, give validity to that, you know, opinion. But that is the question that we want audiences to, you know, to ponder. Was he a hero? Was he a prophet? Or was he a madman?
But when we think about the Israelites, or Hebrews at the time, coming out of slavery, the whole army was killed by God. The whole Egyptian army drowned in the Red Sea, and God did that. I mean, you read the story the way the Israelites tell it. So if you have to turn over a system that's a corrupt system and an oppressive system, it's not going to be pretty. I mean, I don't know how she would do it, because even if, I mean, what could he say to his slave owner, or the guy that enslaved him? You've been nice to me, so I'm not going to kill you. And he'll go to the next, well, by the time he got to the next plantation, the whole county would have known what was going to happen.
And then they started off saying no one would be spared but by gender or age. And so it's, you know, pretty heart-wrenching when 10 children killed, you know, and that's hard to listen to and interpret in terms of like how you feel about everything. But women and children have always been casualties of war. Those almost 60 white men, women, and children who died were also joined by over 300 black men, women, and children who died in that same time frame, between August 21st to November 11th, which again, today is November 11th, and when he was hung. And he was hung today. This is how we got to the 12 days of Turner. It's that he was captured on October 30th, given that trial, and then they hung him on November 11th. So that time frame gave us the title for this event, which is the 12 days of Turner.
What struck me at the end, so we had read all the people murdered in the insurrection. I don't know, I didn't count, but it sounded like the list at the end was twice as long as the people murdered.
It was.
And normally when you have a trial about, there's 3 people or 4 people that have been convicted of killing however many, the majority is never the ones that are charged. So to me, it was almost like, okay, they couldn't have all been the ones doing the murdering. Were they convicted because they thought they were conspiring with them, or?
The convictions were for a combination of murders and for the crime of slave insurrection, which is considered treason and a conspiracy to commit murder, and all the incidental crimes like arson and theft that go along with it. But it all just gets wrapped under the charge of insurrection.
Well, any more comments, thoughts?
One comment I would like to add is that Nat Turner's uprising was neither the first nor the last slave insurrection. There's a long history of them in North America.
But what made this one different?
It had a higher body count, but a higher body count than most, not all. There were a lot more people on both sides killed, and the Haitian uprising against the French, which actually did succeed and established the first free black republic in the world, really, since the free black nations in Africa had different forms of government. And that terrified the slave-owning class in the United States, particularly since it did help inspire another uprising in Virginia, Gabriel Prosser's rebellion in 1800.
I think in that Turner insurrection, it was that you had white people who died, and that made the difference in terms of it struck fear in the hearts of the entire nation, not just in the South, but also up north and to the west. And this is why I see it as being that first battle of the Civil War. Because at that point, the Virginia Assembly in March of 1832, they had a big debate, and they fell by one vote in terms of de-escalating enslavement. Instead, they kind of doubled down and created draconian laws that prohibited blacks from reading and writing, because Nat Turner could read and write, and or he certainly could read. It, rather than de-escalate, they doubled down, and that's why I think the Nat Turner insurrection kind of rises above the level of the other ones that did happen, certainly, but that was the one that stuck in a major way. And to that end, I feel that here, because it happened less than 50 miles from where we are right this moment, we have a responsibility and an opportunity with this history. It is, it doesn't recognize any boundaries of cities, towns, and counties here in the region. So we have an opportunity here to take this history and put it in the light and help it, help people understand what it's all about, have these conversations, and be able to move beyond the legacy of slavery. So I encourage everyone to please look us up. Our website is www.juneteenthva.org, and we are looking for folks to be able to come and help interpret this history and share this history. Today, in fact, I was in contact with the great-great-great-granddaughter of Nat Turner. On this day, of all days, this is when that contact was made. And I call that a God sign, when, things of that nature happen. And, the goal is to be able to, walk this journey with our eyes open and our ears open in order to make sure that we hear and learn as much as we possibly can. So I thank you all for being a part of this, this exercise this afternoon, and look forward to the next one.
Thank you all so
Thank
much
you.
for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
After COVID, can we do this conversation and advertise it and give people?
Yes, that would be great. That would be great. If COVID ever ends.
Well, it's finally coming out with a pretty good vaccine that's supposed to get 90%. effect over with 90%.
Now we start,
Well, I thought they stopped shouting about COVID neighbors.